everyone, and welcome to the Seminole County Board of County Commissioners meeting on Tuesday, March 26, 2024. It is now 9:30. I would ask you to silence all of your cell phones, any other electronic devices you may have, in respect of everybody being able to follow and hear the proceedings today. I would also like to remind anyone that wants to speak today on a consent agenda item, make sure you fill out a form out in the lobby. Green for written, yellow if you want to speak to the commission on any of those items, and get it to our clerk right here, Ms. Dominique. We'd appreciate it very much. Well, that says I'm going to ask Pastor Ron Williams to lead us in invocation, followed by Mr. David Johnson, who will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise.
Let us pray. Lord, we thank you for these commissioners. Thank you for what they stand for. Thank you, Lord, that we have an opportunity to live in Seminole County. It is the natural choice for us. It's not just a motto. We thank you, Lord, that for all these many years, these commissioners have welcomed in the faith-based community and ask us to invoke blessings upon them in their work today. And I do pray for them. They have a tough job. They need the wisdom of Solomon to make the right choices, because no matter what choice they make, someone's not going to be happy with it. And so I pray that they would have a ramrod up their back and know from conviction they're making the right choice. I pray, Lord, today for our first responders and military personnel scattered around the world to keep us safe. And I pray that no one that has the flag of the United States on their uniform dies today. I pray, Lord, that you would watch over the commissioners and their families, keep them all safe and healthy and in your will. Pray for our elected officials federally, state, as well as locally. And I pray for the peace of Jerusalem, as the Bible says today. And also I pray for the folks in Russia who were bereaved this last week because evil men attacked them, much like evil men attacked the Israelis. I pray for these people that are hurting. I pray, Lord, for the people in Haiti that are starving, that you would help them to get some kind of order out of the chaos that's down there. I pray, Lord, for our elections coming up this year, that you would put into office those who would realize they are the ministers of God for us for good, and that they would punish the evildoers and they would reward those who do well. Help us, Lord, to request your presence and your power and your protection and your prosperity here in Seminole County. We love this place, and pray, Lord, that you'd always help us to appreciate the blessings that we have here. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. If you'll please join me in a pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I think they're backwards.
Yeah, they are backwards.
I'll read this one, why don't you read that one?
Thank you, Pastor, very much. And thank you, Mr. Johnson, for leading us in the pledge. We appreciate that very much. Next, we're going to move on to our awards presentation and proclamations. First proclamation proclaiming Staff Sergeant Andrew Cardona, United States Army, as Seminole County's March Veteran of the Month. This will be done by Commissioner Herr. Commissioner Herr?
As I read this proclamation, the connection here to me is very real. My father went to Vietnam as a civilian. He served 4 years there, building field hospitals after having served 20-plus years and serving in World War II as well in live combat. But you'll see the connection here, so this is extremely meaningful to me. Commissioners, I move the following proclamation of the Seminole County Board of County Commissioners recognizing United States Army Staff Sergeant Andrew Cardona for his outstanding service to the United States and Seminole County. Whereas the brave men and women of our Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, Coast Guard, and Space Force demonstrate a resolute spirit and unmatched selflessness, reminding us there are few things more American than giving ourselves to make a difference in the lives of others. And whereas throughout our country's history, generations of service members have answered the call to leave their families, their jobs, and put their futures and even their lives on the line to valiantly defend our nation. And whereas for many service members, the sacrifice has ended in permanent injury or death, yet their spirit remains in the continued preservation of our freedoms and the promise of liberty. And whereas there are more than 30,000 living veterans in Seminole County who served our nation in times of peace and war, through their service, they kept America strong. And whereas Staff Sergeant Andrew Cardona enlisted in the United States Army in 1967 during the Vietnam War and was honorably discharged in 1970. He received numerous awards, including the Good Conduct Medal, National Defense Service Medal, Republic of Vietnam Campaign Medal, Vietnam Service Medal with 3 Bronze Service Stars, and the Republic of Vietnam Gallantry Cross Medal with Palm Device. And whereas Staff Sergeant Andrew Cardona was assigned to the 44th Medical Brigade and served as an emergency room technician with the 29th Evacuation Hospital in Mekong Delta. He also served with the 2nd Armored Division, Hell on Wheels, attached to the 15th Combat Engineers. Upon his return stateside, he joined the New Mexico National Guard for 4 years, then the Army Reserve, completing airborne training at Fort Benning, Georgia, earning the prestigious parachute badge. And whereas Staff Sergeant Andrew Cardona graduated from the University of Albuquerque, New Mexico, with a bachelor's degree. He worked as a news video photographer and received service awards from the Albuquerque Press Club. And whereas Staff Sergeant Andrew Cardona moved to Seminole County in 1985 and worked for several local television stations. He then got really smart and came to work for Seminole County government in 1995 in the solid waste office, and then transferred to Seminole County SGTV, Seminole County Government TV office, until 2001. After leaving the county, he worked in public relations with Volusia County government until his retirement in 2015. He is a member of the Castleberry Veterans, Veterans of Foreign Wars, American Legion, and a life member of the Disabled American Veterans. And whereas Staff Sergeant Andrew Cardona has brought great credit and distinction upon himself, the United States of America, the United States Army, and Seminole County, now therefore be it proclaimed that we, the Board of County Commissioners of Seminole County, Florida, express our gratitude, our admiration, and our respect for Staff Sergeant Andrew Cardona for his outstanding service to the United States Army and residents of Seminole County. Be it further proclaimed that this proclamation is presented to Staff Sergeant Andrew Cardona along with our sincere congratulations and recognition as Seminole County's Veteran of the Month, adopted this 26th day of March, 2024.
Second.
Motion is second. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Hearing none, passes unanimously. Congratulations. Thank you. The commission would be so kind to join us for the presentation on the floor for photographs.
Perfect. Thank you all. All right. Right here on my count in 3, 2, 1. Congratulations. If you want to be at one more with Kathy, if possible.
That's about it. It's better than normal.
In 3, 2, 1.
You deserve it. My friend. You'll say a few words right there. Great to see you. Thank you.
Yeah, because I was here he was here when I was here in 2004 to 16. We need to correct it.
Now let's see if they want to take us up on the press conference.
I just want to say a few words. First, I want to thank the Seminole County Board of County Commissioners for this esteemed honor. I greatly appreciate it. The Seminole County Board of County Commissioners has always maintained a high standard when it comes to supporting veterans. And that's evident by the knowledgeable staff that you have employed with the County Veterans Services Office. Seminole County Veterans Counselors uphold a high degree of expertise and information about benefits that are due to veterans. The Seminole County Commission's endorsement for upholding veterans initiatives is one reason why Florida ranks in the top 3 as one of the nation's most military-friendly states, and that's according to military.com. Commissioners, before closing, I would like to point out that March 29th is the date that ended the United States military involvement in Vietnam. Throughout the month of April, there will be several commemoration ceremonies. According to statistics from Data USA, Seminole County has one of the largest veterans populations who served in Vietnam. Approximately 7,000 Vietnam veterans reside in Seminole County. I also need to acknowledge two wonderful people that I worked with here in Seminole County, and that's Cassie Schubert with the County Veterans Services Office, who has been my veterans representative for the past, I'm saying about 20 years, I think, and has done an excellent job helping me obtain my VA benefits. And also I need to acknowledge Kurt Slowowski with SGTV, who nominated me for the Veteran of the Month. I've known Kurt for several years since we were both street photographers working for local TV stations. Kurt's father is a Korean Marine veteran. And I also need to thank my family, my wife Virginia of 52 years, my son Stephen, retired First Sergeant, U.S. Army, and my daughter April Navarro, and my youngest son Gabriel. Throughout the years, they patiently supported my military reserve obligation, being called away to assist with natural disasters, reserve drills on weekends, and being called away for weeks at a time for training. They truly understood what was involved in my obligation as an Army reservist. Lastly, I want to acknowledge my father, Joaquin Cardona, who enlisted in the United States Navy the day after Pearl Harbor was bombed. Thank you very much, Commissioners. I truly appreciate it. And I had a chance to meet with Commissioner Constantine at the Highland Games, and I was able to thank him there. And before the meeting, Commissioner DeLaurie. But I want to thank all of you commissioners for this honor. I truly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Staff Sergeant. It's because of men and women like you that we're allowed to gather here and assemble today, so we're forever in debt. Next up is our County Investment Advisor Report, Mr. Scott McIntyre. We have, there we are. Good morning. Good morning. You didn't think I was going to pull it that quick, did you?
No, I didn't. It was quick. Okay, and I will be quick as well, reasonably quick. So since we've been here the last time, consumer inflation in February wound up being warmer than expected. That's on top of January, although February wasn't as warm. And I don't have a graph here because it just sort of looked boring. It was kind of flattened out a little bit in terms of inflation. But the one thing that I really wanted to mention is that goods inflation is non-existent. We're experiencing deflation for the most part in goods. So everything from TVs to computers to gaming consoles to bicycles are less than they were last year, generally speaking. The only inflation we're really seeing or predominantly seeing is in the service sector, and you can carve that down even further into shelter costs. And anecdotally, we know that shelter costs should be moving downward because you look at things like Zillow rents and everything like that, and you can sort of extrapolate that forward. And we do see an end to this higher than expected inflation, but it isn't happening. It didn't happen in February. So that does mean if inflation gets squashed eventually, we do expect that we will see yields move downward quickly. And yields have kind of flattened out a little bit as well, but we sort of see that as an opportunity because we still want to extend the portfolio. So consumer spending has slowed. Recession concerns have faded. There are very few economists who believe there's going to be a recession this year, although growth is expected to be on the whole for the year around 1.5%. Quite a bit slower than last year. So far, the first quarter is tracking at 2.1, and it's sort of moved downward. So first quarter could easily be below 2%. The Fed met last week. Powell was upbeat about the economy. He was unconcerned about that inflation from January and February because he's looking down the road, as are we. So investment choices, holy mackerel, that's smaller than I thought it was going to be. The 2-year, which is sort of what we focus at, is lower than it was the last time we met, not as low as it was earlier this year, and not as high as it was in October and November. Going out 3 years, are looking at 4.36, sort of keep that in mind as we look at what I think is going to make sense in terms of portfolio purchases. And, of course, the bird in hand is on the right-hand side. Those are the overnight pool rates. So, inherently you know that those are higher. As we move out the curve, we're going to accept lower. And, eventually later on this year, we're not going to be accepting lower because we'll have done our work early and putting things to work when yields were higher. Upcoming maturities. There are a lot of them here, and actually later in May and in June and in July. There's a lot of maturities that are coming up. Most of those are at lower yields, so we'll be glad to see those go. We'll hopefully be replacing those with higher yields. Looking at some of the recent investments that we made since the last time we were here, $30 million was put to work. From 1 year out to well into 2026, and most of those targets in 2026 are intended to meet what we believe will be your expenses at that time. So that's a drain period, so we're positioning maturities. Recommended purchases, because there's so much coming up, we recommended a pretty fair amount. We've talked to the clerk's office about this and made sure that we've got adequate cash flow to cover it. But I'd like to go out even further. So August 2026, October 26, also targeting where we expect that your draws will be. And then even further into May 2027. So putting our foot out into the 3-year area and locking in some yields there. And let me see if there's another, okay. I do want to mention this before I come back and get you guys to approve it, but portfolio stats as of February, 315 days average maturity, so roughly 10, 11 months. Average yield 4.72. The split between fixed and floating was 84 to 16%, so 16% was fully liquid. And stepping down into that March column there right below, this is employing the security purchases that I'm asking for. So that takes the weighted average maturity up to about almost a year. And the average yield goes down a little bit, which is because we've stepped out of the liquid and gone into the longer ones. The fixed and floating is roughly the same. And the key thing to see here, too, is within 90 days, you still have a tremendous amount that is either maturing or is already liquid that we'll address a little bit later as we've had discussions with the clerk's office about liquidity. So stepping back, maybe this is a good time to ask questions. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Any inquiries by Commission. Commissioner Constantine?
Thank you very much. Just a simple quick, what happened this morning in Baltimore? Is that going to cause, I mean, because it is one of the largest shipping ports in the United States, if not the world, is that going to have any effect, especially in getting, goods both in and out?
I'm going to say no, because we had so, I'm going to say no. And the reason why is that these are goods that are coming across, and for the most part, we have had adequate goods that have made it across. I think the bigger issue is still going to be in the Red Sea, which is where we're starting to actually see increased shipping costs. That's sort of the starting point or ground zero as far as that is concerned. I honestly don't even want to make a call on Baltimore. I didn't think that was going to be an issue, but now that you mentioned it, it's probably something we should keep an eye on. There are a lot of, if you're going to look for a reason why inflation would continue to be higher than we would like it to see, one of the reasons may be shipping costs. So there are just so many balls in the air and so many things going on right now, to be honest with you, and there have been for quite some time, but I think the general thought is that goods prices are not able to be increased because people are not buying goods to the extent that they had been in the past. So even a little bit of relief in terms of transportation and shipping might actually be, I mean to be disrespectful to what happened at Baltimore, but I don't know that transportation halts would be as big a problem as they would be otherwise.
Anything else?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make the motion
Valari?
to implement the recommendations of our financial advisor based on the report submitted here today, and recommend the clerk implement said board recommendations.
Second.
We have motion and second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Seeing none, carries unanimous. Thank you, Mr. McIntyre. We appreciate
Thank you all, appreciate it.
All right, next up, we have our budget work session number 1. For those that are joining us for the first time, this may seem early to some of you, but several years back, the commission decided that we needed to start this process earlier in the year to give all of our stakeholders and our staff opportunities to get us to the sweet spot come later this fall. We're always happy to welcome Mr. David Johnson, our very jovial and knowledgeable property appraiser, and alongside with Mr. Jex, who will be presenting today. Mr. Johnson, welcome.
And Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, if I could just kick it off. As you know, that we are in full speed with our budget development process. As you know, in January, we kicked it off with Dr. Sean Snape from UCF to give us an economic outlook. Today we're going to hear from a presentation from our property appraiser, David Johnson, to give us his predictions for countywide property valuations, our ad valorem revenues, and the impact of the proposed Live Local legislation. Then we'll follow up with an update from our budget director, Timothy Jex, on the other major revenue sources impacting the budget. So this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Johnson.
Very good. Well, very good. Thank you very much. It's always an honor to be with you. And we often say on those rainy August and September evenings when we're all in here by ourselves, okay, we go, how did this budget happening? Well, we started in March. And so this is where we are, and this is the very beginning of the process. It's always a great honor to be here with you and give you some of the highlights and answer any questions you may have. So we do this every year. This is how your tax roll looked at the end of 2023. So when we sent the tax roll over to the tax collector's office for collection and the bills that were sent out in November, this is how the tax roll looked. Bottom line, you had a taxable value of about $49.6 billion, a market value of about $78 billion. We talk about those differences in those two numbers. Those are all the exemptions and all the caps. The difference, that $30 billion is how much that makes up. So that's where we ended up in 2023. What we're going to talk about from this point forward is what 2024 will look like. So we also always talk about January the 1st. January the 1st is the date of assessment as outlined by the state constitution, and so that all 67 counties in the state are on the same page. So we are valuing the properties based on their status as of January 1, 2024, whether they were completed or not completed. We look back at sales because I'm not omnipotent. I can't look into the future to see what the sales are going to be, although we track that on a daily basis for sure. But I'm looking back at 2023 to see what the sales activity looked like so that we can create the 2024 tax roll. This gives you some perspective about how your tax roll looks. This number does not change dramatically. You have a $50+ billion tax roll now. To move those percentages significantly, we would need a chip factory or something like that to make that happen. But for the most part, we're about 67% residential and 33% commercial, and that number stays relatively stable. Some of our sister cities are 90+% residential, some are 50-50, so it just depends, but your overall tax roll is about 67-33. So again, I am more concerned about what happened in 2023 to create the 2024 tax roll. We're doing a comparison here of sales volume in 2022 and the sales volume in 2023. You can see that the sales volume for both residential and commercial and the number of sales dropped dramatically, okay, from 22 to 23. That is a direct correlation to interest rates. It's not because people don't like Seminole County or there's something nefarious going on. It is directly related to what's going on in interest rate. You hear from Mr. McIntyre every month about the volatility of interest rates, and once we can start stabilizing that 30-year mortgage rate, which drives a lot of residential sales, you'll see those sales pick back up. But remember, even though the number of sales are down and the volume is down, we're going to see in the next couple slides the values have continued to increase. So this is another stuff we track very carefully from year to year, is how much new construction is sitting in the pipeline. This is for the 7 cities and for you in the unincorporated Seminole County. You can see that our number of permits have dropped a little bit, volume, nothing dramatic. If you go back to 2021, we had about $1 billion in the pipeline. As of a few weeks ago, we had about $1.25 billion. Those are things that have not come onto the tax roll yet that will be added to the tax roll in subsequent years, depending on the timing, again, depending on the status of January 1. This is the number of new single-family homes that were added into the county over the last year. You can see that number kind of goes down. Again, that's a function of interest rates. That's also a function, as we talk about year to year, of our supply and demand, our very limited supply of land available for new construction. However, that being said, we're adding over $600 million worth of new construction to the tax roll for 2024. Those were properties that were finished as of January the 1st, 2024, and are going on the tax roll for the very first time. This gives you a little bit of a 2-year history of inventory of homes. You can see that that inventory of homes has ticked up. The Board of Realtors love that because, again, that gives more opportunities and more options out there for folks to purchase. If you remember when we were back in 2022, 2023, or actually 2021, 2022, we had people fighting over houses and multiple listings and ta-da. That number is tracking back up about a 4-month supply. The realtors love to see a 6-month supply. We've not had that in a long time, but 3 to 4 months is getting more healthy and giving buyers a lot more opportunities. So this is gives you some idea about the median sales price of new construction in this county. In other words, when we added homes for the first time to the tax roll for 2024, this is for new construction. The median sales price in 2023 was $470,000. That is, compare that to 2022, it was $462,000. If you look at the first couple of months of 2024, which I'm not looking at this point because I don't see that, it's 420, it's 472. The premise here is that we are not seeing any kind of price decrease on new construction. If you look at existing homes, again, at the end of 2022, we had about $415,000 median sales price. At the end of 2023, which is the numbers that we're using, we're at $430,000. Now remember, number of sales are down, volume's down, prices are up. But you can see, from 21 to 22, we were up about 13.5%. From 22 to 23, we're about 3.6%. I will tell you, look back over a 35 or 40-year history in this county, 4 to 5% rate of appreciation on single-family homes is what you will see. There have been ups and downs, but about 4 to 5% is what you will see on single-family homes in this county. Now, the first 3 months of 2024, it shows a little bit of a decline of 2.33%. Again, that's just a snapshot of the first 3 months. Don't pay any attention to that, because by the time we get to the end of the year, we will see that number tick back up, probably not by 10 or 15%, but probably in that 3, 4, 5% range, depending again on what interest rates are doing. So this gives you a perspective of where we are with all, again, I'm not looking at 2024 yet, but again, we monitor this on a daily basis. That gives you some idea of what we've seen in the first 3 months as of March 24th, 2024. So this is one of the areas that we monitor very significantly for lots of reasons, not the least of which is it in fact impacts your tax roll tremendously, and that's the value of Save Our Homes. Remember, we've got about a $30 billion differential between the taxable value that you actually collect taxes on and what the market value is. And you can see that from year to year how that has gone up exponentially. And back in 2021, we had about $7.1 billion that was not on the tax roll because of Save Our Homes. Fast forward to 2024, this is what we have so far and will be producing for the 2024 tax roll, probably will go up a little bit more. It's over $16 billion. The difference there is the difference between the taxable value and the market value is all the caps. People who have not sold their homes, people who have homestead and they've not moved out. That shows you how significant that is. And actually, the average Save Our Homes cap that you have with you is about $150,000. So assuming a traditional median single-family home in this county, you get a homestead exemption worth $50,000. You'll get another $150,000, again, this is on average, another $150,000 from Save Our Homes. You're not paying on taxes based on $200,000 on average for a house in this county. That $150,000 is one of the highest Save Our Homes values in the state, as far as, because of our appreciation and our relatively expensive housing product here in the county. That cap goes up by either the lesser of the Consumer Price Index or inflation. Consumer Price Index or 3%. The Consumer Price Index, as you know, was 8, 9%. So it's been defaulting to 3%. In 2023, it's 3% for 2024. If we see inflation get below 2%, you will get back to those numbers like we saw in 2021 at 1.4, whatever the rate of inflation is, or 3%, whichever is less. So again, this is what's driving everything, whether it's your investments or my tax roll, is interest rates. And this affects both the residential and the commercial side of the equation. You can see what's happened in the last number of years with interest rates. This is 30-year mortgages. We ended in March of 2024, this was a snapshot, 7.25%. That's twice as much as it was in 2019. That certainly affects people's ability to buy and purchase homes and decisions that they're making. According to what the Fed decides to do and we get inflation under control, We think those rates will trend back down. They will never get probably back to 3.5%, or should they probably. But if we can get in the 5.5%, 6% range, that creates a whole nother market dynamic. So these are the residential trends that we're seeing. We're still relatively critically underhoused in this county on lots of different ways. Still relatively low inventory, high demand. There is becoming more balance between the buyers and the sellers due to rapid interest rate increases. We still have a very strong renter market. About 31% of our homeowners are in fact renters. And on the rental side of the equation, about 94 to 96% of all the apartments are in fact occupied. And as Mr. McIntyre indicated, we are seeing some decrease in the rate of increase on rents. So that's starting to stabilize, and I think that's a positive thing, mainly because you have a lot more inventory, number one. Number two, because of hyperinflation kind of going away. We're going to go through these next slides relatively quickly. This gives you just a snapshot of what makes up that $50 billion tax roll of yours. Again, as we know, most of it's residential in nature, 151,000 parcels. 106,000 of those parcels have a homestead exemption. So again, we're very, a very community that very much lives here, not many rentals or, investor type homes as people have their families here and live here. And the average tax bill between $2,400 and $2,700 a year. 43,000 apartment units. We are seeing the market values stabilize on those. Remember, folks that are in the commercial business, they build the product for the net operating income that they can produce, okay? They're not just being altruistic and it's like, let me put an apartment or a shopping center there. There's a reason why they're doing it, because they want to make money. It's America, we still can make money. The challenges that commercial property owners have are the same challenges that residential property owners have. They are fighting the issue of high insurance. They are also fighting the issues of expenses as far as building a product. So you're seeing some of the slowdown in how much getting financing and being able to build these products. But the one thing I wanted to point out is, we talked about the average taxes for a residential home between $2,400 and $2,700 because of all the exemptions. Apartment owners do not have, not apartment owners, but apartment renters do not have those exemptions, and their average tax bill on Class A apartments are between $3,500 and $3,700 a unit. We'll put a pin in that, and we'll get back to that in just a second, looking into the future. About 5,000 hotel motel rooms, market values are up about 2 to 3%. Again, that's starting to stabilize. Our commercial market, about 4,400 parcels, almost 60 million square feet of space, $6.5 billion worth of taxable value. Again, in that 0 to 3% rate of appreciation. Industrial market, again, is starting to stabilize also, about 2 to 3% increase. And there are 2 caps allowed by Florida law. When we talked about with Save Our Homes, which has almost $17 billion in it, and then we have the 10% cap on non-homesteaded properties. I get asked all the time, what's a non-homesteaded property? Well, it's every piece of property that doesn't have a homestead exemption. So that's vacant land, that is shopping centers, that is apartment complexes, that is whatever. And so, again, these are values that, taxable value that is not on the tax roll. For 2024, and again, we are still working those numbers because we are in the midst of still redoing our commercial properties. About $3 billion is not taxable at this point under the 10% cap, a fraction of what it is under the residential cap, just because of our makeup of our tax roll. So here's what we've all been waiting for, okay? What do we see after all that? How's that translate into what your 2024 tax roll is going to look like? And again, these are projections moving forward, and we certainly work very closely with Mr. Jacks and his staff on monitoring this very closely. We are predicting about a 7% growth in your tax roll over 2023. And I know Timothy's going to talk a little bit more when he does his presentation about how that translates into dollars, actual dollars into your tax roll. But again, it's about a $3.5 billion increase in taxable value. That is, gives you some perspective about the final taxable value for the general fund. Again, about $49.6 billion. We're projecting $53.1 billion for 2024. The fire fund taxable value was $35 billion. At the end of 2023, we're projecting that to go up to $37.5 billion. And the road fund at $24.6 billion, going to $26.3 billion. And looking out into the future, and again, we're kind of conservative, but we're not crazy conservative. I mean, so don't think these are going to double. They may be a little bit on the conservative side, but we are saying 7% for 2024, 2025, 6% for 25, 26, and again, 6% for 26, 27. Now, I will say, if we see interest rates coming back down and some geopolitical things starting to get solved, and the world's not on fire, I think what the out years can be a little bit more positive. Again, this area is an extremely attractive area for folks to come and invest in. People want to live here. I know, and you know, because you see these projects a couple times a month that you're approving, that people are just waiting on the sidelines to pull the trigger so they can get their financing. And I will tell you, like it affects homeowners, insurance is a huge issue. You know, I used to hear all the time about property taxes. Oh my God, property taxes. We are the least of the problems these days as far as the cost of doing business. A lot of it is insurance and financing. So there's three legs to that stool, you know, interest and taxes and insurance. And so one of those is, you know, out of hyper control. So we'll see if we can get some of this stuff under control. And I think in the out years, you might see a little bit better positive growth. But for projection purposes, we think 6% is a good number right now. This gives you an idea about what a value of one of your mills is. And, you know, back in 2021, 22, it was about $38.5 million. Projecting to the 2023, 2024, $47.6 million, 24, 25, which is what we'll be working on, about $51 million. It's the value of a mill, and then projecting out those couple years out. So again, that's a very healthy amount of money to generate from each one of your mills of general fund. Same thing with the fire fund. About $36 million is the value of a mill. In the fire fund, it was $27 million back in 21, 22, projected out to $40 million in 26, 27. Here's the value of a mill for the road fund, about $25.3 million. And we always do this slide because it's something to be proud of, Seminole County has the lowest general millage based on our surrounding counties. This is the cumulative millage of the school board, your general millage, fire fund, et cetera. The only one that comes close to us is Lake County, but we're significantly lower than our surrounding Central Florida communities. So challenges moving forward, and I told you to put a pin in that value that the apartment complexes or the taxes that they pay. We always talk about supply and demand. We don't need to talk about that anymore. We have a finite amount of land. People want to live here. That's driven by demand, and those issues will resolve themselves based on the market. The other issue, which has a more of an impact, to be honest with you, is legislative actions. And there are a couple amendments, there's going to be one amendment that will be on the ballot coming up in 2024, which will allow for property owners to basically increase their homestead exemption. Now, I will tell you, in the scheme of things, this is pretty, not too bad. This basically, it's the second $25,000 will go up by the rate of inflation. A lot of times when voters vote in exemptions and that type of thing, and there's no inflationary mechanism on there, over time they become irrelevant, okay? So that's kind of what this is trying to address, is taking the $25,000 homestead exemption and allowing it to go up by the rate of inflation as measured by the CPI. Not the lesser of 3%, but it would go up by the rate of inflation. So if inflation is 8%, it would go up 8%. Again, it needs 60% of the voters to pass that. It would become effective January 1, 2025. So what does that look like? Well, it looks like this. Had it been in place today, you would have basically, the estimated revenue impact to Seminole County general fund would have been about $420,000, okay? So that gives you some idea about what that looks like. We take about $86 million off the tax roll, again, in a $50 billion tax roll. That's not too huge the first couple of years. Obviously, it's going to grow as we move outwards. But again, the theory is to keep up with the rate of inflation. Fire fund, about $150,000, and you can see how it translates through the rest of the funds that you control. This is the one that becomes a little bit more problematic, or has some, I don't want to say unintended consequences, because I don't think anything's unintended a lot of times. But these are consequences that you are going to have to address, and it's certainly above my pay grade from a policy perspective. But I know your staff is on this, and something that needs to be addressed. So the statutes now allow for what we call the missing middle, multifamily middle market tax exemption. And in order to accomplish that, it becomes effective for the 2024 tax roll. It allows for for-profit entities, in other words, any, folks that are building apartments or whatever. They don't have to be nonprofit, they can be for-profit. That must be new construction with more than 70 units dedicated to providing affordable housing. They must receive a certification through the Florida Housing Finance Corporation, and that's the trick. I don't ever know, and you won't know, until the beginning of every year, which properties qualified, okay? And let's go back to the concept of affordable housing. It's between those folks that make between 80% and 120% of area median income. That 120% number in this county gets you up into the $84,000 number, okay? That's a lot of folks, okay? And you've got 43,000 apartment units, okay? And a lot of them are in complexes that are 70 units or more. A lot of them have been put on the tax roll in the last couple of years. So all that being said, that becomes, potentially a big impact. And they receive 100% exemption. So if I've got 100 units in an apartment complex that meet that qualification, those are wiped off the tax roll. It's not they're paying 50% or 30% or 80%, it's 100%. Now, they have to apply year to year, and they have to get the certificate that's delivered back to me, but it becomes, it can become quite a bit of tax revenue, which we'll see here in a second. So for 2024, again, remember this became effective as of January 1st, 2024, you have 3 apartment complexes in this community that qualify, okay? And the trick is, it's 3 this year, is it 13 next year? Is it 10 the next? I don't know, and you don't know. And we won't know until they submit their paperwork to Tallahassee. And what does that look like? Well, this is dramatic, but we have, if assuming that the constitutional amendment passes to increase the homestead exemption by the CPI, that would affect 101,000 parcels. First year, $420,000 worth of revenue off your bottom line. For 3 parcels this year, you're affecting your general fund by $302,000. Again, I think that can grow exponentially, and no one will know. You have no control over that. I don't have any control over that. And that becomes somewhat of a concern. However, the good news is there is an opt-out provision. And we're not going through all that, but I know your staff is working on that, that you can pass an ordinance that basically says that if you qualify based on being part of the Schoenberg Center for Housing Studies annual report, if you're on there and identifies you as one of the 67 counties that has a quote-unquote enough affordable housing, you can opt out. So you're one of 50. Of the 67 counties, 50 counties in the state do in fact show up on that list. So you can opt out, and the provision that we saw that's taking effect for 2024 for those 3 apartment complexes, if the ordinance is passed and all the, I's are dotted and T's crossed and everything, had your public hearings, then you can opt out of that moving forward on your millage. Now, what happens in Sanford or Winter Springs or whatever, that's not your concern. That's for them to figure that out. But this affects your millages that you control, that you can opt out of that. And with that, I will be available for whatever questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. We'll go to the commission. Commissioner Herr, we'll start at this end and work our way all the way down.
So a couple of questions. I'll work my way backwards here. So if you go to slide 57, the 3 parcels and $302,000, that's a reduction in revenue
Correct.
that in total revenue coming in.
Correct.
But we have 0 now. This is a new complex coming out of the ground.
Right.
We will generate revenue on the rest of the units.
Right.
But we'll be 300 grand short on those 3. The rest of the units are generating revenue that we do not
That's correct.
have.
That's correct.
So I want to be super clear about the fact
Right.
that this this is just a reduced
Right.
tax liability for those buildings.
That's correct.
And they are already paying roughly 25 to 50% more in rental units than
Right.
we're paying on homes.
Right.
So it's a leveling of the playing field, not necessarily a giving away of the
Right.
coffers
And
here.
I guess that's a policy decision between.
I get it.
Is
I
that
just want to
80
get it on the record.
120%?
Yeah.
Yeah, the right numbers and, but
Right.
yes, you're correct.
Right. Do you see any change on the horizon with regard to multi-family units with ownership opportunities? So we've somehow managed to, and the insurance is blamed. I'm not 100% certain that's accurate. But we can't seem to get a multi-family bite on something that's an ownership opportunity, and I think that's a miss.
I think I agree with you, and I don't understand, and I understand condominium ownership are complex, although there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of units in South Florida, and more being built all the time. We have about 15,000 condominium units in this county. That number has not changed in a decade. And to your point, Commissioner, I think, well, that's complicated, ... Well, yeah, but other folks are seeming to be able to do it. I think we get to a point, and we're getting there, where our density issues become more of a challenge, where that becomes more attractive. And it's just been easier, I think, for some of the apartment complexes to do that and to get financing going forward. But I think we will see increased opportunities for condominium ownership. And we certainly have a lot of townhouses under construction, but that's a whole little bit different. Yeah.
Yep. We just can't get to the right volume in order to create the opportunity for our citizens to have that home ownership opportunity. And often the first home that you can buy is a condo.
Right.
And it
Right.
is it's a great teaching
Right.
process, because they have to build a reserve, and you'd have to do that in home ownership, but you don't realize that when you're the knucklehead that buys the first house that may not have done that appropriately and
Right.
panicked when the pipe broke. Like,
I
get it.
know back in 2005, 6, 7, when we had the last housing boom before the crash, we were having a lot of conversion of apartment complexes to condominiums. That was fraught with several bad things. Again, that was, developers trying to make a quick buck and move on, reserves were not appropriate, et cetera. I think there's still some hurt based on that. I think the banks get real nervous about that. I know the other issue is, especially in South Florida, with a much higher end product, okay, from the 900,000s to the 4 million, we're never going to be there here because we don't have the coastal properties and stuff like that. But that middle, income, that $350,000 to $500,000, $600,000 number is the sweet spot. But then you've got to be able to make that work economically and get the densities correct, the location correct, et cetera. So I think there's opportunities, especially in the Sanford area, lakes and that type of thing. There's a lot of opportunities moving forward with some higher density type condominium type developments, for sure.
Yeah, we have, I think we have a government building sitting on the lake, so maybe we can, or 2, or 3, or 4.
There you go.
Sure be nice.
Can you talk to us about the ghost leases on commercial property and where you think that's heading?
So that is I will tell you, that is the one thing that's holding us back with a higher growth rate. Mr. Jackson and I talked about earlier last year, and it's like, we may be closer to 8 as far as growth. And I backed that down. One of the reasons I backed that down is because of our Class A office space and the ghost leases, as you indicated. We have about 4.5 million square feet of Class A office space, most of it along the International Parkway corridor. And there is no mystery that some of those buildings are empty. And yes, they're paying their rent because they have a lease, and they are triple net leases, and they are Class A tenants, et cetera, et cetera. When those leases come up for renewal, the question is, are they going to renew at the same level and the amount of square footage, et cetera? So that is a concern. I will tell you, again, investors buy properties based on the net operating income that those properties can generate. If you've got expenses increasing on the insurance side of the equation, rents being relatively flat, if not declining, that becomes problematic for people wanting to buy and sell those properties. That $3 billion that you have under the 10% cap, that is kind of shielding, because I'm lowering values on some of those properties, let's be quite frank, because that's what it is. That's not translating into much of a reduction in the tax roll, because they have so much of a cap built up that for me to lower it, I would have to lower it by millions and millions and millions of dollars, which we're not doing, at least not initially, for that to even see a tax impact. But what that is doing, it's eroding the amount of the saver homes. In fact, let me go back here real quick. Let's see. Yeah, that's it. So last year, at the end of the 2023 tax roll, we had about $3.6 billion under the 10% cap. You see what it looks like right now, 2024, it's $3 billion. That's as of the other day. That may go down a little bit more, and that the eroding of that number is because we are lowering values of some of the commercial type properties. I will tell you, the good news is, retail used to be our problem child. There are problematic retail establishments out there, although that's somewhat stabilized for the most part, because not much of it's been built over the last number of years. There's backfilling that's going on with people that are leaving, whoever that is. But the office market is very problematic. Anybody reads any kind of national journals, the banks are having a heart attack, okay? Not so much what's happening here, but the tens of millions of square feet in Midtown Manhattan, okay? That they have billions, and I think it's something, I only want to say, the trillions of dollars worth of loans that are outstanding on some of those buildings across the country. So that is a problem, and that's certainly something that we monitor very closely.
David, thank you. You always do excellent presentations. Your knowledge level is beyond compare, and you're a blessing to the county, so I appreciate you.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Commissioner Delory.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would agree with Commissioner Herr. Your approach, your knowledge, and the way you approach this is very reassuring for us and the citizens. So first of all, thank you.
You're welcome.
With the multifamily mid-market exemption, is there anything in the state legislation that actually talks about the savings being passed on to the renter? So there's nothing that guarantees that?
Zero guarantee.
Okay.
And I mean, I know Commissioner Constantine and I kind of follow this, and I know your staff has too. There's no provision that says you've got to do a give back. No. So.
Okay. Thank you.
And this was one of the concerns that we had last year, we being the property appraisers. Again, we're not policymakers. We implement policy, and we certainly respect the legislative process. But our concern was when we raised the flag about, for the first time in Florida's history, you will be giving for-profit corporations an exemption, okay? There's always provisions out there for the nonprofits and all those folks, and rightfully so. And no one seemed to care. They were whistling by the cemetery. And remember, this is how we got there. And so, but there's absolutely no provision whatsoever to do a give back. Now,
I just would have hoped that they would pass those savings on to the renters.
Yeah. Well, so here's the other thing is I think this live local legislation obviously got amended this year. I think we will continue to see this as real life situations occur, become more and more adjusted moving forward. This is why the legislature meets at least 60 days every year, because they go, well, that didn't work out so well. Let's go back and relook at this. And so when real life consequences, I say, this is a huge diverse state. And what works well here will not work in Dixie County and probably won't work so well in Miami-Dade County. So when you start doing these broad brush approaches to statewide policy, that becomes somewhat problematic and why they have to be relooked at. But there is absolutely no provision for a give back for savings.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Lockhart.
So much good information, a lot to digest, a lot of moving objects. But your tea leaves are still better than anybody else's tea leaves around. So thank you very much for that. In the same vein, talking about whether or not savings need to be passed on to renters, one of the things that I think this board has grappled with over the years and will continue to grapple with is impact fees. And one of the notions that is shared in front of this board every time they come up is that, well, if you increase impact fees, it's going to increase the cost to the homeowner because those are going to be passed on by the builder. Do you see the same being true if impact fees were to be lowered? Would those savings be passed on? Have you seen that? Or is that urban legend?
I'm not sure we've had that data show up. And as many of you know, I serve on the Habitat Board, and we had to pay impact fees also, and that certainly impacts our ability to deliver. We would certainly be able to deliver a housing product for a little bit less, but there's no guarantees that's there, if you do reduce them. I think the bigger drivers really is financing and insurance. Like I said, I used to hear all the time about, these property taxes are killing us. Well, and there's no doubt about that they can get really, really expensive. But with the 10% cap in the Save Our Homes, I think a lot of that has been mitigated over the years. But insurance is as big of a problem for commercial property owners as residential property owners, if not more so of a problem. And so I don't know I don't think I can answer that question intelligently.
Okay. had someone from South Florida recently in the real estate world mention that they are losing buyers because of insurance rates. And I don't know if we're seeing that here in Central Florida, or can you opine on that at all?
I don't think we're seeing it yet, although I think if you talk to my mortgage broker friends, it becomes a real issue when you have insurance that, and I'm talking kind of middle to upper middle class homes, being $400 to $500 to $600 a month, okay? And that's real money. And that can certainly throw, and of course, when they're getting qualified for a mortgage, they're looking at the whole cost of home ownership, principal, interest, insurance, and taxes. And if one of those pieces goes up exponentially, which it has over the last number of years, that can throw people out of the market. And again, interest rates, so there's a lot, those two things are pushing and pulling right now, and I think it is holding back. The only good news for us here in this area is we do have a lot of in-migration from South Florida. People is like, forget it, I'm moving up to Central Florida, and we have in-migration from other parts of the country. So that's I think something that's softening the blow a little bit, but I think for our homeowners here, or, who are born and raised here, I'm certainly sure it's an impact on what they can afford and not afford. So
We were trendsetters 30 years ago, Commissioner Constantine. we were, there's still people down there ready to
With the
carry out the flag,
yeah.
but right, thank you very much.
you're welcome.
Commissioner Constantine, then back to Commissioner Herr.
Well, thank you very much. And David, and I mean this as a compliment, you are always so normal. We appreciate that. And for one that lived through the conversion of the 80s with the condominiums from apartments, I think that there's the hidden concerns are always also the maintenance fees that come up. I can tell you that that there is no control over homeowners associations with condos, and condos are different than apartments, and apartments, there's just a lot of expenses there. But the thing that really concerns me, and you and I have talked about this a lot, is the multifamily middle. We all understand that if you go back to single-family homes, especially with the 3%, for the services provided from county and state, they don't pay for themselves.
Right.
Apartments, however, because they're not covered by the 3%, have in the past, and I've heard that opined by a number of people as to, this is a good reason for apartments, and I understand that in one sense. However, this, without any, as the question from Commissioner DeLore, without any guarantee that it's going to go back to the renters, concerns me a great deal. And if you could go to the one with the 302, there was $302,000,
Right.
3 parcels.
Right.
How many apartment complexes do we have in Seminole County?
You've got about close to 300.
How many qualify for the provisions of this?
So over the last, defines what new is, okay? And so within the last 4 to 5 years, you've got about 20 complexes that have come onto tax. Not all of them in unincorporated Seminole County. I know you guys get blamed for stuff, but that's Sanford, or that's Lake Mary, or that's Winter Springs, but about 20 have. would apply
Taxes will be
qualify.
impacted,
Right.
whether they're in the city or county.
That's
It
correct.
will impact our general revenue.
Right.
But also, is there not a provision that, and I don't know if it's gotten out, renovated
Yes.
and/or
So
purchased?
there was a whole food fight over what renovated means, okay? Substantially improved, okay? So that brings in a whole nother element, and so they came up with the definition, and I can't recite it off the top of my head, but to your point, that opens up the gates again for another group of properties
And newly purchased
and renovated.
and renovated.
Yes.
And as I have found out, and I think you have found out, they're doing seminars in the financial capitals of America on, hey, you can get an extra 5% on your income if you come and buy apartments in Florida.
Which is, why would you not want to buy multifamily apartments in Florida? Because it's a growing area. so.
And because you can get, and you said 100%, but between 81 and 120, it's 75%.
That's
And under 80, or 80 or under, it's 100.
Right, correct.
And ladies and gentlemen, I wouldn't have a problem if the law said
Right.
80% and under, you get 100%. That is hitting the real
That's the
need.
problem.
That is the real need. But, and I don't know if you're aware, but you and I have talked about this. Of the 750 units in that $302,000, 80%, no, 75% come from one property.
Right.
And of the 750 units, only 8 are at 80% or less.
Right.
So, and at $85,000, that is middle class
That's middle class.
in
this
Seminole County.
Absolutely middle class.
And so, is this meeting the needs, and this is rhetorical, this is not meeting the needs of affordable housing. Saying all that, and, knowing that one property got, 240 of the 302,000, or that is 80%, okay, 80%. I believe that county manager and county attorney, you are working on that opt-out provision, and that was I just wanted to confirm that.
Yes, we are reviewing that, and we would bring that back to the board.
Because, again, if we're really meeting the needs of affordable, attainable workforce, I get it. Okay, there's some things we have to, maybe, swallow. But when this is clearly not meeting that need, but it's just, and does not go back to the consumer, and it's just basically a tax break for profit companies, I have a real concern.
And not to be, toot my own horn, but you guys have been so supportive over the years of affordable housing and initiatives out there. I, again, serve on the Habitat Board as chair and have for years. There's a lot of things that we all could be involved in this community. That's a passion of mine. I agree with Commissioner Constantine. If it gets to the root of the cause, there's no denial that you guys have always bought into helping out with affordable housing, attainable housing, workforce housing. Again, this is above my pay grade, and I'm certainly not a policymaker. I don't think that's what this is trying to do. Remember that the reason we got to 120, that 80 to 120 is you make the math fit where you need it to be, okay? I'm talking on the Tallahassee level. I think as Commissioner Constantine indicated, if it was 80 or below, or 80 to 100%, all of a sudden you lose tons of these units. Because the one that Commissioner Constantine was talking about, Integra Crossing, if the ones that are at 80 and below, it's a fraction of that number. 8. It's 8 of the 270-something units.
750.
Yeah. So, anyway.
Done.
Commissioner Hurd, you have another
I
comment?
promise to be super brief. Insurance is impacting home sales in Seminole County and home ownership in Seminole County. What's happening from my perspective is that if you can't get the home insured, you can't get the mortgage.
Correct.
Therefore, you're locking it into a cash buyer. And that's what we're seeing happen. And that changes the whole dynamic of the community. So
Right.
in all honesty, if there's only one thing that the legislature focuses on, it has to be this insurance crisis.
That's correct.
And they're not.
As a employee of one of the country's largest privately held insurance agencies, my homeowners was dropped and I'm in an excess policy, we couldn't get me placed.
Well, and
Doubled the premium.
The issue is, and again, it's a balancing issue. You have a state.
Oh, we have the greatest competition, yeah.
Eliminated
We
competition.
fix their ability to
Right,
raise
right,
prices, and
right.
we compete against them at a lower price
That's
point.
correct.
That
So-
model is not American.
And
It doesn't work.
That's exactly correct. And I always say, you know, and I appreciate the kudos, and again, your staff is always wonderful to work with. I'm not that smart. It's the market that determines what's going on. And it's just being able to interpret what's going on in the market. The market's always going to adjust in a free enterprise type situation. But when you've got a governmental entity that's competing with
private
the free marketplace, that, and yes, it's painful, and there's some opportunities to lessen that pain until more private sector comes in. But I don't know why the legislature is not, it's not on their radar screen, to be honest with you. So, anyway.
David, a lot has been said. I concur with a great deal what my fellow commissioners have said. A couple inquiries. Any idea what the agricultural exemption value is?
In this county,
In the county?
it's relatively small. It's less than half of 1%.
Okay.
So of your 50-something billion dollar tax roll, I would say less than a few $100 million is not being assessed. And most of that is with a couple of large properties.
Sure, okay. And secondly, just want to make sure, I think you and I had a conversation maybe a couple years ago, and I want to make sure if this trend is changing somewhat. You know, these multifamily apartment settings, the last time you and I had an opportunity to really dig into this and you went through your files, it was somewhere around 72%, give or take, of apartments are within the city
Cities.
limits, not in the unincorporated part of Seminole County.
That's correct.
Is it still tracking about the same,
It's
give or
still
take?
tracking about the same. And again, I know people get all jazzed up. They go, "What, you know, you guys hear it more than anybody.
Right.
You know, why did you approve that? Well, that's the city of Sanford. You need to call
Sure.
them. Okay, and yes, it sits right there on the line. I get it. And the lines in this county are all over the place. But you're exactly correct, Chairman Zibauer, that about 75% of all the new construction for apartments has been in one of the 7 cities.
Great, thank you. To my fellow commissioners' points in regards to this legislation in Tallahassee, I've actually had conversations with some of these developers who develop multifamily units, and you would be surprised, many of them do have a desire to build an attainable or affordable or workforce-type product, except that's not their business model.
Right.
To your point, it's what the market drives. And so some of them have said to me, you know, if, by example, the county were to set up some kind of scenario where they could pay into a fund for affordable or attainable housing, that would be one viable option. And so that may be something we want to look at as a solution. As we talk about impact fee credits and all these other things, you know, this commission, as David has indicated, we've been very proactive in trying to find those attainable workforce type settings. We haven't been very successful, but we have a lot of stuff out there, and we've helped people get there. But we've got a lot of room to go. And I think that's one thing we might want to, you know, have a discussion about and have staff look into. So no further questions for...
Yeah, and not to get too far into the weeds, but on the Schlimberg report, and I know Commissioner Constantino, look, I was surprised we actually made it. Qualified, to be honest with you. We barely qualified. I mean, we have like 650, and how that math looks, I mean, Commissioner Herr and I both have finance degrees from Stetson. Go Stetson.
Go Hatters!
I don't know how that math works. That's way above where I'm at. But we only theoretically have 652 units over what we need. Well, I think we could all make the intellectual argument that that's probably not, who knows? But anyway, it's just interesting. The counties that don't qualify are like the Monroes, the Keys, and Miami-Dade, et cetera. But anyway, so it's just interesting. So let's hope we stay on the list, so,
And you think that was by mistake?
yeah.
No.
No.
Very good. Thank you,
All right,
Mr. Johnson.
thank you very much. Thank
Mr.
you.
Jex?
Also a Stetson hatter.
That's correct. I'm Timothy Jex with the Office of Management and Budget. I did want to echo the board and thank David Johnson. He's not legally required to provide this information until July, but our office relies on this now as we go into the budget process. So it's to our benefit, not to his. We really appreciate him coming in. I'm going to quickly cover 10 major revenues that support ongoing county services. The first 5 are in our general fund, and they make up 94% of the revenues in that fund. We provided some backup reports that we used to provide our projections on page 52 of your documents, and you'll note that we've only had about 3 to 4 months of collections for most of the revenue in the current fiscal year, so it's too early to set budgets for FY25, but we will provide some estimates. The first chart shows our general fund ad valorem revenues, which is generated by property taxes. It makes up 74% of our total general fund. And David's projection of a 7% increase will provide an additional $16 million in new revenue for fiscal year 25. Next is our half-cent sales tax program. This is funded through the state of Florida's 6% sales tax. It's distributed to all local governments in an effort to provide relief for property tax payers. This is not the same as our locally generated penny sales tax. It's distributed to all counties based on population. And through the first 3 months of collections in the current fiscal year, we're flat to last year, and we're projecting no more than $1 million in new revenue for FY25. Next are our state shared revenues. This is also part of the state of Florida's 6% sales tax collection. They make up 5% of our general fund, and for fiscal year 25, we're projecting an additional $500,000 in revenue growth. Next, we have our utility taxes. This is a 4% levy on electricity, water, natural gas, and propane in the county. It's not related to our water and sewer services. It makes up 2.9% of our general fund, and we typically see small, predictable annual growth in this revenue. For fiscal year 25, we're forecasting about $200,000 in additional revenue. The final major revenue in our general fund is the state's communication service tax. It's a 5% tax on telephone, cable, and streaming services. It's continued to fall a small amount each year, but for FY25, we're forecasting it to be flat. So those are all the major revenues in the general fund. When you combine them, we're projecting approximately $17.7 million in new revenues, which would be on average a 5.5% overall increase to the fund. Moving on, we have gas taxes, where the county receives 4 separate gas tax revenues. These are restricted for use on transportation activities. We collect a total of 9 cents per gallon, which supports 40% of our total transportation operating costs. We do not pay for any transportation infrastructure out of this fund. In fact, this fund requires a 43% general fund support through a transfer. Next, we have tourism taxes, which are based on a 5% charge on hotel room night revenues. We have a county consultant who is forecasting FY24 to see a 5% decline from FY23, but we're still well above pre-COVID levels. This is our locally generated third-generation infrastructure penny sales tax revenue, which funds 100% of the county's transportation infrastructure, like roads, flood mitigation, and traffic improvement projects. These figures represent the county's portion, which is 55.6% of the total countywide revenue. In addition, the school board receives 25% of the revenue and the city's 19% of the revenue. This third-gen penny will sunset on December 31st, 2024, so the 25 budget will only include $14.7 million for the first quarter of the fiscal year. If the fourth generation penny is not approved, the county would need to identify other funding sources to pay for these basic infrastructure needs. Next, we have our building permits. We saw a spike in 2021 when interest rates fell. This revenue has declined, but it also remains above pre-COVID levels. The final revenue we'll cover is our Article 5 revenue. It's generated from a $4 service fee collected by the clerk when a document is recorded. Half of that comes to the county, that's our $2. It's correlated with mortgage originations, so you also see a spike here in 2021 when interest rates fell. We're currently projecting $553,000 in fiscal year 24, and while I expect this revenue will eventually get back to the $700,000 range, it does not grow annually with inflation over time. The Article 5 fund currently supports the state attorney, public defender, and judicial offices, and the FY24 budget required an $859,000 transfer from the general fund in order to balance. So any costs added to this fund for fiscal year '25 will come dollar for dollar from the general fund. Moving on to budget stabilization. For the last 3 years, we've used budget stabilization funds under our ARPA grant to pay for links, facilities improvements, and fleet replacement. We won't have that revenue starting in fiscal year '25. In 2023, the county approved an ordinance to allocate 6% of our general fund non-ad valorem revenues for the protection of natural lands. The clerk's office is finalizing their fiscal year '23 audit, but based on the numbers we have today, it would equate to a $4.2 million transfer into that fund, which will bring the total reserves of the fund up to $8 million. Gonna skip ahead to the... So this slide shows our total countywide reserves. We're currently working on our mid-year fund balance adjustment, which will be brought to the board in April. That adjustment trues up the ending fund balance from last fiscal year with the beginning fund balance of the current fiscal year. And it's our opinion that the amended reserve budgets after the mid-year adjustment are the best representation of what our true available reserves are. Many of these reserves are restricted for use on the services for which they were collected to fund. So for example, fire reserves are required to be used on fire services. The general fund reserves represent 20% of the total revenue at $59.6 million, which was our target during the FY24 budget process. And finally, this is our budget development schedule for fiscal year 24-25. We're already reviewing budget requests from our internal departments. The constitutional officer budgets are due on May 1st. We'll hold 2 work sessions with the board to discuss the entire countywide budget in June. We'll set the millage in July, and we have 2 public hearings in September to adopt the budget. And you'll note that the school board's public hearing is on Tuesday, September 10th, so we're proposing to hold ours the next day. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very kindly, Mr. Jex. I will start what's on top of my mind, then I'll go down to the far end with Commissioner Constantine and work our way this way. You made a statement on the infrastructure sales tax with the 3rd, 4th generation that the county would need to find replacement revenue sources to fund infrastructure. Can you tell us where that would come from? Where is that alternative revenue source? Does it exist?
At this time, we would propose that it would come out of the general fund, and no, we don't have additional $44 million per year in the general fund that would be available. We would have to look at other services to reduce.
So in a nutshell, we would either have to find and raid our reserves, which would run out in, based on what I've seen, one and a half years, 18 months, reserves will be gutted. Or cut services considerably.
That's correct.
Which this board would have to make very hard, tough decisions on what programs get cut, what services get cut, and so forth. All right, just wanted to make sure I understood that. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Commissioner Constantine, we'll start with you and work our way back.
I just wanted to, you said, that it would, the 44 million, but our reserves in the general fund are approximately 60 million, and that's approximately what we get from the penny sales tax. If you look at that, it's 59 million, and it's about 59 million, so it would be 1 year. Almost 1 year. The only reason it wouldn't be 1 year next year is because, you got the 3 months in there. Thank you, Tim. I really don't have any questions. These are facts, or supposed facts based upon the best information available, and I appreciate your good work. Thank you.
Commissioner Lockhart?
Again, data is so important for us as we start putting together all of the different pieces of the puzzle to come to the decisions that we're going to have to make in the fall and, well, summer. It's a good news, bad news scenario that you're presenting. is kind of how, there are so many areas where this county is so strong, and we see great, solid projections and stability, but there are so many unknowns still, and the penny sales tax renewal being one of them. I think we need to be really honest with our citizens as we're having these conversations about the choices that will have to be made if it is not renewed. And I think while we continue to refer to it as funding 100% of our transportation infrastructure, well, not 100%. Well, you used a phrase that was, it caught my attention the way that you said it.
I'm sorry.
It wasn't 100% of our transportation projects are covered with the infrastructure sales tax, but I don't know, the way that you said, I'd love, do you have it in your notes?
Sure.
Did you read it from, I'm not asking you to give up your secret, but did you read it from a note? Because I'd love for you to reread it.
Sure.
SGTV rerun.
Yeah.
So our third-gen infrastructure penny sales tax funds 100% of the county's infrastructure, like roads, flood mitigation, and traffic improvement projects. If the fourth-gen penny is not approved, the county would need to identify other funding sources to pay for these basic infrastructure needs.
Okay.
I would clarify that we, as far as transportation infrastructure, it's fully paid for out of the third-gen penny tax. We do have infrastructure in the fire fund, like fire stations. We have infrastructure in our water sewer fund. So the entire county's infrastructure is not paid for here, but transportation is.
And I think one of the great things about the penny, even though we focus on the transportation infrastructure aspects of it, is that it is used and can be used for so many other things that the citizens need in this community that we've identified. And so let's not confuse it with neighboring counties' transportation taxes that they're talking about.
This is an infrastructure tax that can be used on other eligible infrastructure.
Thank you. I'm going to keep saying, every time, I'm going to keep saying that, because I think it's critical. So many positive things are done with this that have nothing to do with wheels.
And roads.
Trails. Good stuff. Commissioner Glary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tim, Jax, well done. I like the presentation. It's very clear, very precise, very organized, and I just want to thank you for setting the table for us as we move forward in our budget sessions in the upcoming year. Also, David Johnson, thank you very much as well.
Thank you.
Commissioner Herr.
Thank you, Tim, and that's just a fabulous education that brought you here. I actually think that from the two presentations, we need to talk through the expectation of our teams and, quite frankly, of the constitutional officers from the perspective of, at least my observation, observationally, when we hear the 7 number from David, we seem to see budgets that come back 7 or plus. And just so that we don't end up sitting at that table in those work sessions and folks act surprised that that's going to be a problem. I'm just going to message that that's going to be a problem. We need to start figuring out how we do this differently if we're not going to change the tax structure. And if we don't end up with the penny sales tax, that changes everything. And so I just point out that we are at a meaningful crossroads in terms of the trajectory of the future for the county. And I personally believe that we walk away from roughly $30 million that comes into the county from folks that don't live here, that support the infrastructure in this county, and that we would have to make up from our citizens, and our citizens are paying that in the counties that they go visit. So I just want us to think through that as we're preparing our budgets, and that's everybody that takes a bite of that budget.
Thank you, Commissioner Herr. The one thing that is unspoken is that that's not the whole number from the standpoint of what this additional penny has afforded this county is being able to get millions and tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in grant money because we're able to match those funds to bring that money from DC down here to do projects we otherwise could not. Many of these grants require matching funds, and if we don't have the funds to match, we can't leverage that to get done. So the reality is that penny is leveraged much greater than a penny. And to Commissioner Herr's point, almost approximately 30% of it is paid by folks that don't even live here. So I think we do have to look at that moving forward in the budget sessions on how this looks and how it all plays out. I also appreciate and find value in the Article 5 funding model that we now have that we haven't seen in the past, which is great to clearly understand what that is. I would also finally say, and it's probably no surprise to my fellow commissioners, I still do not believe we need to be carrying a 20% general fund reserve. Those are taxpayers' dollars. I understand there's rainy day funds. I got all that. But if you look back historically on the repayment from people like FEMA and so forth for those disasters, I'll probably stop talking at this moment, be happy with the 6% I've been able to garner since I arrived here, and hope that we can have further conversation, in real conversation, what that really needs to look like. So with that, thank you very much. County Manager Darren Gray would like to have a word.
Yeah, just a few things, and I appreciate the comments, and thanks, Mr. Johnson and Mr. Jex. We say when this board adopts a budget in September at the public hearings, we immediately, we may take 30 days rest, and then we're back at it again because it's an annual process. And what I heard loud and clear from our process last year for the budget work sessions, to your point, Commissioner Herr, about the 7% or whatever that percentage is that is an increase, we not only did we put out budget guidelines to our departments every year, but this year we actually did it with the constitutionals. Now, they are not required, to go by our guidelines, but we thought, it's a good opportunity as we start forecasting and looking at what our revenues are, is that we gave them the same budget guidelines that we gave our own operating departments. So that's something that we did this year. We also started earlier this year, if you know, that I mentioned at the beginning of the year about kicking off with an economic outlook from Dr. Snaith, the economist, to see what nationally and regionally that's happening. With Mr. Johnson coming today, it's great. I've never seen that happen in any of the jurisdictions that I've worked before, about the property appraiser coming in ahead of time and helping us. Not that the others don't, but it does give us a good opportunity to see how the summer's going to fall. And then lastly is that, last year, we used to split our budget work sessions. 1 month we would have the constitutionals come in, and then we'd take a month, and then we'd bring our operating departments. Have you seen the change that we have made this year is that we are going to have them back to back. So Mr. Jex will actually be given an update on the revenues based on the forecast that you saw today. The first day we'll hear from our constitutionals and their budget requests, and then we'll roll right into departmental requests the next day. So we'll have it all together, so you have all the information within that week. And then we'll continue to communicate this all the way up until the summer.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Gray. We appreciate that very much. Mr. Constantine, you have a question?
No, not a question. Just comment on a couple of things after it passed by me that has been said. Number one, you are right, Mr. Chairman. The citizens of Seminole County made a decision 3 generations ago that has changed the lives of everyone in Seminole County. And, when others fail or sometimes pass, an increase in sales tax, sometimes don't, our citizens continually see the value for the schools, for the cities, for the county to doing that. And that has made a difference, and why we continue in your presentation and other presentations be the best. People continue to say we're the best place to live in Florida through a number of different ranking groups. But also, I wanted to thank Commissioner Herr for pointing out the obvious, and the county manager for acknowledging the obvious, that other than Mr. Johnson, I'm going to say that, it seems that everything else continues to increase beyond whatever the number is that he presents to us, based upon the fact that ad valorem seems to be what they don't get, when really Mr. Jenks said that it was 5.4
5.5.
5.5%. That doesn't mean they get to come back and say 5.5, because for years and years and years, the county has not increased to the percentage that the constitutionals, and all you have to do is see the percentages there to realize that it is now north of 64%. Maybe right at 64%. But the fact of the matter is it would almost be interesting, and I don't want to put any more work on you, County Manager, really be work on Tim, but it would be interesting to see a parallel budget with no sales tax. And just, I mean, it's one thing to say it, it's another thing potentially to see it. And it may just be interesting, since it is coming up, and you're talking about $44 million. Next year, $60 million, more likely, as years go on, and increase. Just what that would mean to the general revenue of Seminole County.
It'd be confusing.
Tim, thank goodness for the efficiency of spreadsheets. That's probably a pretty quick entry.
We can do it.
I don't think that's what he suggested.
Anything else from the commission? Mr. Lockhart.
Something that we'd kind of flirted with the idea of years ago, and I think Tim put together a potential scenario, and there's differing opinions on this, but in other counties, there are millages assigned to the sheriff, to certain areas. I think year after year, we look at the overall pot, and I think of my compatriots at Parks and Recreation, and every year that department gets less and less of their share, if you will, because, public safety is the main reason why local government exists, right? And so we're going to make sure the fire trucks are rolling with the tires they need to have on them, and that our folks are paid appropriately, and we're going to make sure the sheriff has the money that he needs to make sure that everybody's safe. But somewhere in all of that are those quality of life issues that are so important to the people that live in this county. And when we get into the politics of divvying up a budget every year, there are winners and losers. And it would just be fascinating to see if perhaps dedicating a millage to certain things like Parks and Recreation or like libraries or the sheriff, if that wouldn't help to streamline some of our budgeting processes in the future. I know we flirted with it in the past, and there were folks who weren't terribly excited about that idea, but if for some reason the penny does not pass, and if we wind up in we're going to have to put all options on the table of how we can look at this a little bit differently.
I'm very excited about that
Good,
possibility.
good. All good points, and I would just say that, we've typically had good relations with our constitutionals.
Absolutely.
And everybody understands working together is really in the best interest of the community as a whole. And yes, public safety is important. Arguably, everything in the county is important. But I will tell you, since I've arrived here, what I have witnessed is what I will call and I mean no ill to this scenario as I categorize it, is the parents taking care of the younger children, which is, we're sitting in an old building right here. We've bought new buildings and built new buildings for most everybody out there that's not part of the BCC. We have staff that are working in old buildings that have been around for a very long time. We have fleet people that are working in areas that arguably in a private sector, I probably would not allow them to work in those conditions. And so, but at the end of the day, it's my belief that the constitutionals, the BCC, will find a path to work collectively and collaboratively together, and understanding what the real needs are for the citizens of this county. So I think there's a lot of discussion to be had yet. Individual millages, of course, is one discussion, but I think before we get there, I think we talk to our stakeholders and we all find the right place. And right sweet spot, if you will, for our citizens, so.
One final word,
Johnson.
Since we're talking about millages, you know, there's two parts to the property tax bill. That's the assessment that I'm responsible for and the millage rate applied by taxing authorities. Remember, the reason I give you an idea about what a value of each mill will generate each year is to show you the power of that mill. If the penny sales tax was not in place and all priorities continued to be the same as they are today, you would essentially have to raise the millage in this county for the same level of services by 1 mil.
Yeah.
Now, what does that translate to? Well, that's $1,000 on a $100,000 house. I mean, that's just real simple math. On $100 million office building, that's $1 million, okay? So that gives you some perspective of what the mill does. And you're right, you'd have to find a place to fill that gap. And, you know, the assigning a millage to different responsibilities and offices and stuff like that, that's a whole nother conversation. But that gives you an idea. That's why I did that. And that's why Mr. Jackson and I tracked that number very carefully on a yearly basis, is to give you an idea about what does 1 mill generate. Last year it was 50 million. This year it's 53.5 million. You know, we've got projections out there, but that gives you an idea. You'd have to backfill that way or certainly cut services. So those are, you know, the two choices you basically have, so.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Johnson,
Thank
as
you.
usual, very informative, and we appreciate your willingness to come early and help us get this kicked off.
Glad to do it.
Thank you very kindly. Thank you, Tim. All right, folks, we're going to now move into our consent agenda area. Before we get started, if there's anybody here, again, that wants to speak or make a comment, fill out a green card if you make a written comment, yellow if you want to speak, get it to the clerk right here, Dominique. We'll take that and we'll get you up here to speak. Right now, we're going to go to the County Attorney, Kate Latour, for the reading of the rules for public participation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Florida law provides that members of the public shall be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard on propositions before the Board of County Commissioners, except when the board is acting on emergency or ministerial matters or conducting a meeting exempt from the requirements of the Sunshine Law. Individuals shall be permitted 3 minutes each for public comment or 6 minutes when the individual is an official representative of a formal association or group. The chairman may modify the maximum time for public comment at his sole discretion when appropriate. Public comments on quasi-judicial or other public hearing items will occur during the board's consideration of those items this afternoon. Public comments on pending procurement matters or on non-agenda items shall not be permitted at this time. Members of the public desiring to make public comment must fill out a speaker form and present the form to staff, and forms are available in the lobby. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Latour. Mr. County Manager, any revisions or changes to the consent agenda items 5 through 30?
Mr. Chairman, believe it or not, I have no changes.
Okay. So the consent agenda, constitutional officers, item 4, and then 5 through 30, no changes. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone here to speak on any of these items?
No, sir.
Okay, I'll close the public hearing. I'll go to the board.
Mr. Chairman, I would move the approval of consent agenda item 4, constitutional amendment, and the county manager's consent agenda 5 through 30.
Second?
A motion is second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed, like sign? Seeing none, motion carries unanimously. Mr. County Manager, anything else before we take our morning break?
Yes, just one item. I just found out this morning that the Board of Trustees did meet in Tallahassee, and the Yarborough property was approved for acquisition and purchase by the state.
Yay!
Just want to thank this board. I know this was a long year, and a lot of us worked really hard, but also want to thank our Parks and Recreation staff who really towed the line, as well as the Yarborough family and their representatives as well. So just wanted to pass that news on to the board.
Yes.
And I would like to thank staff, my fellow commissioners, the public, for all the brain damage we inflicted upon each other getting to this place, and with our patience, wearing thin. It really has been a great accomplishment, and I think it's going to be a great asset, not only for the state, but for generations to come. So thank you very much. Anything else for the good of the order before we take a break? We'll stand in recess to 1:30. Thank you all very much.